Hello again. This time, we will be discussing about Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives. Imagine a teacher who enters a classroom without any purpose or objective. The teacher is not clear on what to teach and what he wants or what she wants her students to be able to do at the end of the session. That would be totally confusing on the part of the students, not to mention on the teacher. So every professional teacher should have very good knowledge of Bloom's taxonomy. So this first part will introduce you to Bloom's taxonomy. So we'll be able to discuss the six levels of the original Bloom's taxonomy. And then later on, we will see that it was revised. And we will also get the chance to visit a website that has a practical guide to the revised taxonomy and also a listing of apps that can be used in order to apply the Bloom's taxonomy. Benjamin Samuel Bloom was born on February 21, 1913, and passed away September 13, 1999. So he was an American educational psychologist who made contributions to the classification of educational objectives. So his work is familiar to all teachers. His work is similar to a Bible because it guides the teacher from the time the teacher plans the lessons, implements the lessons, and also assess whether his or her students learn from the lesson. So initially, the purpose was simply to have a framework to classify test questions that faculty members shared because at that time they were also asking questions for teachers to create uh, some sort of a test, no, like similar to our let. And so the different teachers contributed, but they had to find a way how to classify this question appears to be easy. This question appears to be about applying what was learned. This question is about evaluation. So they just had to find a way to categorize. And through workshops and with other workshops and meetings, they were able to uh, come up with the Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so this is how the Bloom's taxonomy came to be. Okay, so eventually Dr. Bloom edited the first volume, and it was known as the Taxonomy of Educational Objectives. So this is now the classification of different objectives. So if you're going to write a lesson plan, this is definitely the guide for you to be able to frame, not to be able to write or draft. What is that lesson for? What is the objective of that lesson? Or now, what is the outcome that you want to come out of that lesson? Okay, so these educational objectives were categorized or divided into three domains: the affective, the psychomotor, and the cognitive. That is why, if you are doing a lesson plan, you want to see that there is an affective domain. You want your lesson to have an effect on how the learner values, how the learner feels about the lesson. Now, you want them, for example, to enjoy. You want them to value what it is you are teaching. So that is under the affective. Psychomotor would be about the use of the muscles, the use of eye-hand coordination. No, so it's something that is done, something that is worked at. And cognitive is the thinking processes. What kind of thinking process would you want uh, your learners to be able to do. Okay, so the taxonomy is also hierarchical, meaning learning at the higher level is dependent on having attained prerequisite knowledge and skills at the lower end. So it's like from the most basic skill that you want your learner to be able to do up to the higher levels of thinking or doing. That's why you always hear HOTS, HOTS, higher order thinking skills. Do you just simply want them to repeat what you said, like just remember something, or do you want them to go as high as creating their own models or producing their own output? No, so that is what we mean by hierarchical. Okay, so now it provides a framework for teachers, as I've mentioned to you, in designing lesson plans that include higher order thinking as the goal or objective for student learning. So we all already mentioned there is the cognitive domain, the affective, and the psychomotor domains. Now, the the levels of the objectives are as follows. This is the original uh, taxonomy that Bloom and the original group was able to craft. So the lowest part would be knowledge, and then comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. So what are these? When you say knowledge, it is simply recall of information. Okay, so when you do a lesson plan and you say at the end of the lesson the student should be able to uh, say the name of the character in the story. Okay, so that is just like remembering or recalling the name, no? Okay, and then the next level, a higher level, is comprehension. Okay, so you can say at the end of the lesson, the learner should be able to retell the story. How will they be able to retell? They should have understood it so that they can also tell the story. So it's not just remembering it, but really saying it again and telling the story again. So you would see that they understood. Okay, and then a higher level than that is application, where you already use and apply the knowledge, no? So example, if you taught them how to, if your lesson is to be able to add sums of numbers up to sums of 10, so the student should be able to apply it in, let's say, simple problem solving, and you see the learners adding numbers up to 10, so that would be application. And then analysis would be identifying and analyzing patterns, no? So you say, for example, um, like analyze the the value of, let's say, the dollar, because they say, is it true that when it's Christmas time the dollar goes uh lower, no? I mean, not, I mean, the value of the dollar goes down. Why? So you analyze, is it true? So you look at data and you see, is it true? Look, backtrack all the Decembers of one decade and see, and now you're looking at the details there and trying to see patterns. That would be analysis. And then synthesis is using old concepts to create new ones, no? Composing, imagining, putting, it's more of putting together what you learned. So let's say if I ask you, you make a synthesis of all the constructivist theories. What are they all saying? So out of all this, no, Brunner and Piaget and all, then you make a synthesis. If I tell you, give me one sentence to truly, that will really explain what constructivism is for you, what knowledge construction. So that would be a synthesis. And the highest level here is evaluation. It is assessing, um, it is evaluating, identifying its strong and weak points, or saying after it's the top one because if you identify the strong and weak points, you're still analyzing and synthesizing, and later on being able to express what you think of something, no? What your evaluation of something, what your assessment is of something. So that is the old Bloom's taxonomy. So when you make objectives in your lesson, you consider, is it just the knowledge level? Am I just asking them to recall, or just trying to see whether they understood? Or am I making them apply what they learned? Or am I making them sort out details and see patterns? Am I allowing them to uh, to put together, no, to sift through so many information and come up with the big ideas, that is synthesis? Or are you able to let your learners evaluate whether they believe something, whether they consider that as a very good theory or as a very good approach? So that would be evaluation. Okay, so here, this slide is a very, very useful slide because when you are already, or you're going to plan for a lesson, you identify what level you want your objectives to be. And here you see that there are keywords already, because one of the most important thing is for you to be able to write the objectives of your lesson plan. Because whatever your objectives, those are also the ones that you will assess later. Did I teach well so that my students learn? How will I make my test questions? They should be based on the objectives that you made. No? What questions will I ask them as we are having a discussion? You also base your questions on what you intended for them to be able to do or think about. So for example, for knowledge, the keywords choose. So these verbs are already starters for your lesson plan objectives. Like you say, at the end of the lesson, students will be able to define what photosynthesis is, or we'll be able to list um, the 9 planets or 8 planets, be able to locate, be able to relate, to recall, okay, to tell. So these are already starters. So this is a very good uh, reference for you. Okay. And so if you ask them to describe what's the outcome, a definition. If you ask them to find something, what's the outcome? A fact. No? So you're here. This is very useful for thinking of the assessment. How will you see whether you achieve your goal, your objective? You'll be able to see on the outcomes. What would your learners be able to do or produce? No? And right here are the questions. Can you list 3? Can you recall? So now when you're teaching, you have a guide what questions to ask. No? And of course, we always say from the lower level thinking skills to the higher level thinking skills, this part on analysis, application, analysis, synthesis, those are already high level thinking skills. So these questions here are very important. Of course, you still ask the questions here on the red and the light orange something part here, because you have to see whether they remember it, whether they understood, but you have to move forward into application down to evaluation. Okay, so this is the Bloom's taxonomy, but remember that this is the original one, and it's good to still have a background of this. But 45 years later, after this was first devised, it was revised. Oh wow, that's a rhyme. Okay, so we'll end it here, and we'll have another part on the revised Bloom's taxonomy.